That's the craziest part about the strategy is that you could own shares for a $0 cost average. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. In today's episode of the option selling series, we are going to be using shares to make money with covered calls. Last episode, we covered using money to make money with cash secured puts. Now we're going to focus on what to do with those shares once you have them assigned. Let's get right into it. Hopefully you guys remember this graphic here because we are focusing on the covered call portion of it. Covered calls are slightly more difficult than cash secured puts because there is a inherent risk with kind of screwing yourself on some gains. At the same time, if it's a gain, it's always better than a loss, but you also obviously want to capitalize on some of that upside. We're going to focus on what covered calls are and how you use them. Covered calls are a way for you to liquidate your assets while also receiving premium off of your 100 shares. You use your 100 shares as collateral as opposed to cash secured puts where you use the equivalent of those 100 shares in capital to receive premium. I know, that might have been a little confusing, but let's break it down. Let's make it more simple. You bought this watch a year ago for $45,000. You don't want this ugly ass watch anymore. You can sell it right now for $50,000, or you can sell it 7 days from now for $50,000. And also get $1,000 for waiting. Which one of these seems like the better offer? Probably the one on the right. The only downside is over the course of those 7 days, the watch might appreciate to $55,000 or it might depreciate to $48,000. Either way, you are receiving $1,000 in premium for waiting. You either lose the asset for more than what you purchased it for, or you retain the asset and you also keep the $1,000 in premium. Now, real quick, correlating that over to a real stock. Let's say I bought 100 shares of Tesla after their robo-taxi event. Let's say I purchased these shares for $215. I own 100 shares of Tesla at $215. That means I have $21,500 deployed. Tesla is currently sitting at $221. On those shares, I've appreciated $6 per share, meaning that I am up $600 on 100 shares. Tesla has essentially done nothing for the past 5 days. Let's say I want to sell my Tesla shares at $225. That's a $10 appreciation on 100 shares. That means my profit is $1,000. But if we look at the chart, Tesla hasn't really done much for the last 5 days, right? It's gone pretty much sideways. If I know that I want to sell those shares at $225, why not sell a $225 covered call? Doing so and having 5 days of chop, that means I've collected 5 days of essentially free premium via theta decay. Because if you guys know, with options, they decay every 24 hours up until their expiration date where they are either in the money or they're worth absolutely nothing. So again, if I'm okay with selling my shares at $225, I want as much time exposure in that position as possible because the more theta decay I get, the more money I accumulate on the shares. And that is where covered calls start to get fun because the money that you collect from those covered calls, the money that you collect using your shares as collateral, goes directly into dollar cost averaging down. That means if I added the shares at $215 and let's say I did sell that $225 covered call, let's say I sold it for $200. I no longer own the shares at $215. I own them at $213. And then if I'm selling the shares at $225, that's another $200 on top of the $1,000 in profit I'm going to expect to make. The link to this spreadsheet that I'm about to use is going to be in the description below, so make sure to go check that out. I'm about to show you just how crazy your investing can get once you start using covered calls the right way. First things first is we want to plug in the amount of shares we purchase. So we're going to use that same Tesla example. The date doesn't really matter. The date is just there for logging purposes. Let's say I purchased 100 shares of Tesla at that $215 mark. So my current dollar cost average is $215. My total cost is $21,500. Let's say I went in and I sold that one covered call that we were talking about. I said, okay, I'm going to sell it for $09.27. I'm going to get that $225 strike price. The expiration date, weekly, doesn't really matter. The entry, let's say I sold it for $200, 2.00. That's $200 profit from the shares already, and I haven't even sold them yet. Now, what about the dollar cost average on those shares? Remember, I added them for 215, but why does my current DCA say that I'm owning them at 213? That's because you purchased $200 in premium using those shares. That premium that you collected, that $200, is now profit in your pocket. You own that. So you can either use it to allocate funds into other positions, or you can do what I like to do and average it into your current dollar cost average. So again, let's say I didn't get called on this position. Let's say I bought this covered call back for $100, 1.00. Now I own the shares for 214, right? I didn't quite get the $200 in premium. I decided to close this position early. I booked $100 in profit. I own the shares for $1 less now. Now, the following week, let's say I did the same thing. I sold one covered call. 1004 is when I purchased it. Let's say Tesla shares appreciated a little bit. I want to sell a $230 covered call now. 1025 expiration, 1015 expiration, whatever the expiration date. I don't know. Let's say I sold this one for 4.0. And now look at it. My dollar cost average is at 210. I've booked $400 in profit. If the position gets assigned, I am now up $500 more on my 100 shares, and I get to sell them at 230. 230 minus 210, that's $20 profit per share. $2,000 profit per share, excuse me. $2,000 profit per share, and I've also profited $500 from selling calls. Pretty easy, right? Sounds like it's stupid easy money up for grabs. The only downside to this position is what happens if you sell a $230 covered call and Tesla runs all the way up to 250. You still have to, unfortunately, sell that position at 230. There's other things that you can do, but I almost never buy covered calls back for a loss. That's just my personal preference. The reason being, if you buy a covered call back for a loss, so let's say I came in here, I sold this covered call for 4.0. Let's say I bought it back for 12.0. So I am negative $800 on that position. I realized negative 800. I lost 3% of my overall total cost, and now my dollar cost average is all the way up at 222. So rather than buying that position back for a loss, I simply just wait and wait and wait and wait until the shares come back down. Ultimately, shares move as much as they want to. They move up, they move down. Sometimes the shares just keep running forever and you're never going to get that re-add. Most of the times the shares retrace some of that exponential move that they've made, because 230, a $10 move on Tesla, that's quite a bit. It's due for a pullback. And as we can see based off the chart, it pulls back quite a bit. So we're better off just waiting for that position to come back. We can add the shares at 222 versus buying the covered calls back for a negative $800 loss and kind of screwing ourselves over. This is where stuff starts to get crazy with covered calls. You could essentially own shares for a $0 cost average. That's right. You could even own shares for a negative dollar cost average. You could have a negative $5 cost average, meaning the shares actually owe you $500. So even if you sell them at zero, you're still profitable on the position. And you can do that by just selling covered calls infinitely. So let's say I did buy this 230 covered call back at 2.00. So my dollar cost average is now down to 212. Let's say I sold another 235, 230, whatever their expiration date, and I sold that one for 1.5. This time I didn't get very much premium, and I bought it back for 0.01. It expired worthless. I now own those shares at 210.51. And then we just continue the process, and we continue selling covered calls and sell covered calls over and over and over again. Let's say we sold 230s, expiration date doesn't matter. Let's say we sold them for 8.0. We were aggressive with this one. And then we bought them back at 3.0. We just booked another $500 in profit. We're now up $949 on shares that we haven't sold. And our dollar cost average is now all the way down to 205 from 215. Now, theoretically, you could own the shares for zero, but most times you're just going to get assigned on the shares. All this profit total that you get, once you are assigned on the shares, you just X out of there and then close these positions up here in the top left, And now you just wait to add more. Let's say I wanted to buy 100 Mara. I bought these at 10.04. I bought them at, let's say, 17.50. Now I am in another position, $1,750, and I just start selling covered calls again. Simple as that. And I sell an 18.5 or 18 flat covered call. I sell it for 0.50, $50, and my exit is 0.01, expired or worthless. I now own those shares for 49 cents less, or percent-wise, I now own those shares for 2.8% less. Now, if I do this 20 times, 30 times, I'm going to own the shares for $2 to $3. If I do this 50 times, I'm going to own the shares for less than what I even put into the position. Again, that is a theoretical position that could possibly happen, but most of the time you're going to get assigned. All in all, covered calls are a way for you to handle downside. You dollar cost average down your shares. You collect premium once you have shares that you acquired via cash secured put. And investing gets easy. It gets super freaking easy. I hope you guys can visualize just how efficient and effective these covered calls are going to be, because once you start investing in them, you are not going to want to buy any options ever again. You might want to do your occasional lotto play. That's okay. But once you realize the potential of covered calls, you are never going to want to go back to those. That will conclude today's video. Again, the link to the spreadsheet is going to be in the description below, so go make sure to check that out. I will see you guys next week for another video on exactly all of my parameters I use to roll covered calls, my percent gains, my percent entries, what I look for delta values, theta values, all that stuff. That will be in next week's video. I'll see you guys later. Peace out.